2,800 years ago, a blind poet known as Homer would produce two of the greatest works that Western civilization would ever see. Regarded as one of the most influential authors in human history, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey would immortalize the heroes of ancient Greece. Through his verses, he gave us the tales of Odysseus and Achilles, of Paris and Helen, names that would echo through time, etched in stone and sung in every generation that followed. But to understand the full scope of Homer's world, the gods, the warriors, the lovers, and the traitors, we must return to a time of myth and legend, a time when men fought not just for glory, but for the will of the gods. Before we dive into the fires of Troy, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness isn't just history. It's the birth of storytelling itself. And we're going to uncover it piece by piece, battle by battle, line by legendary line. So if you love mythology, epic tales, or just want to understand why the names Achilles, Helen, and Odysseus still echo across time, this is the channel for you. Now, let's begin where gods walked among men, and one woman's beauty brought a kingdom to its knees. Long before Homer recited a single verse beneath the Ionian sky, the ancient world was already a mosaic of fragmented kingdoms, seafaring traders, and sacred myths whispered by firelight. In the Bronze Age, nearly 5 centuries before Homer's time, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to powerful civilizations that rose and fell with the rhythm of gods and kings. Egypt, to the south, stood eternal with its stone temples and divine pharaohs. The Hittites ruled the Anatolian heartlands. And to the north of them, a warrior people emerged on the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans built their citadels from limestone and legend. Cities like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos were fortified with massive walls and ruled by warrior kings. Their palaces were centers of trade, culture, and warfare. And there are records, written in the early script of Linear B, speak of gods we would come to know from Homer: Zeus, Poseidon, Hermes, Athena. But their gods were not yet myth. They were real, present, demanding, and often cruel. These people believed the divine walked among them, that wars were not just between men but between wills, the will of mortals and the whims of immortals. Earthquakes, droughts, storms, and famine were not natural events. They were punishments. And among all these city-states, one stood at the edge of both history and legend: Troy. Though Homer wrote of its grandeur centuries after it burned, archaeological ruins in modern-day Turkey confirm that a city once stood there and fell violently. It is in this murky space between reality and mythology that Homer would find his voice, not to record history, but to resurrect it. His world was different. The Mycenaeans were long gone, their palaces reduced to rubble. The Bronze Age had collapsed in a wave of destruction across the Mediterranean, leaving behind dark centuries of silence. Cities disappeared, writing vanished, knowledge was lost. And then came the poets. Centuries before Homer was born, on the western coast of Anatolia, there stood a great city. A city with walls so massive, so impenetrable, it was said they had been built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves. This was Troy, a city of wealth, wisdom, and wonder. Sitting at the crossroads between East and West, Troy was a strategic and economic powerhouse. It controlled trade routes through the Aegean, making it both prosperous and envied. Ruling Troy was King Priam, a wise and respected monarch, and his queen Hecuba, who bore him many children, 50 sons and 50 daughters. Among them, several would rise to prominence in the coming war. Prince Hector, the eldest son, was Troy's strongest warrior. Honorable, loyal, and just, Hector was not only the military heart of the city, but also its moral center. A loving husband to Andromache, and a devoted father to their infant son Astyanax, Hector was revered as both soldier and citizen. His sister Cassandra, however, lived a cursed life. Once gifted with the power of prophecy by the god Apollo, she refused his advances. In his wrath, Apollo cursed her so that no one would ever believe her visions. Despite accurately foreseeing the fall of Troy, her words would go unheard, ignored by all, including her own family. Then there was Paris, the youngest son of Priam. Before his birth, Hecuba dreamed that her child would bring about the destruction of Troy. Terrified, she ordered the baby to be killed. But the shepherd tasked with the act spared the child and raised him in secret, far from the palace. Paris would grow up unaware of his royal blood, or the prophecy he was destined to fulfill. Far away in Sparta, events were unfolding that would intersect with Troy's fate in the most fateful of ways. Zeus, king of the gods, had taken interest in a mortal woman named Leda, the queen of Sparta. Disguising himself as a magnificent swan, he seduced, or in some versions, assaulted her. From this union, Leda laid 2 eggs. From one egg hatched the twins Castor and Pollux, and from the other 2 daughters, Clytemnestra and Helen. Helen would grow into a woman of legendary beauty. So beautiful, in fact, that she was said to be the most desirable woman in the world. When she came of age, suitors from across Greece arrived to win her hand. Kings, princes, and warriors, including Odysseus of Ithaca, Ajax of Salamis, Diomedes of Argos, and Menelaus of Mycenae. Fearing that her choice would spark war among the rejected suitors, Odysseus proposed a solution. All contenders would swear an oath to defend whichever man Helen chose. She chose Menelaus, who would become king of Sparta. And for a time, there was peace. But elsewhere, jealousy and divine ambition were about to shatter that peace forever. High on Mount Olympus, a grand wedding was taking place, the union of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea goddess. All the gods were invited, except one, Eris, goddess of discord. Angered at her exclusion, Eris arrived anyway, but not to celebrate. She brought a gift, a golden apple. On it, inscribed just 3 words, "To the fairest." Immediately 3 goddesses laid claim to it: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Unable to decide who was most beautiful, they turned to Zeus for judgment. But Zeus, wisely refusing to get involved, chose a mortal to decide: Paris, the young shepherd of Troy, still unaware of his royal heritage. Each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised him political power, rulership over all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered him supreme wisdom and military glory. Aphrodite offered him love, the heart of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love. He gave the apple to Aphrodite, and she kept her promise. She told Paris to go to Sparta and claim Helen. Paris arrived in Sparta as a guest of King Menelaus, welcomed into the royal palace as kin. But under Aphrodite's influence, Helen fell in love with Paris. Or perhaps she was bewitched. Either way, when Menelaus left for Crete, Helen fled with Paris to Troy. Some stories say she was abducted. Others say she left willingly. Whatever the truth, when Menelaus returned and discovered her gone, he was consumed with fury. He invoked the oath sworn years before and summoned all of Helen's former suitors to fulfill their vow. What had been designed to prevent war now caused it. The abduction of Helen was not just a personal insult. It was a political and sacred violation. She was no ordinary woman. She was a queen, a symbol of Spartan power, and more than that, she was the mortal thread in a divine tapestry woven by the gods. When Menelaus returned from Crete and found his wife vanished, the fires of vengeance were lit across the Aegean. But vengeance alone could not reclaim Helen. What Menelaus had was a sacred promise, an oath sworn by every man who had once sought her hand. Years earlier, to prevent bloodshed over Helen's marriage, Odysseus had proposed a binding pact. All suitors would swear to defend her chosen husband, should any wrong befall him. At the time, it seemed a clever way to avoid conflict. Now, it was the trigger for the greatest war the ancient world would ever witness. Word was sent across Greece, to every island, every port city, every inland stronghold. Princes, kings, and warriors began to rally not just for honor, but to uphold the oath that had once bound them in brotherhood. One by one, their banners rose over the hills and their ships filled the harbors, assembling a coalition so vast it would become the stuff of legend. First came Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae and elder brother to Menelaus. His kingdom was the wealthiest and most powerful in mainland Greece, and he would assume command over the entire campaign, not out of loyalty but ambition. Troy was more than a target, it was a prize. Then came Diomedes, the fierce warrior king of Argos, young yet already known for his cunning and unshakable courage. Favored by Athena, he would become one of the key leaders in the coming battles. Nestor of Pylos, a man who had outlived generations, brought with him not just troops but memory. He had sailed with Heracles, spoken with Jason, and now would lend his wisdom to the younger kings who thirsted for glory. Ajax the Greater, a mountain of a man from Salamis, arrived with his towering shield and unmatched strength. He was the embodiment of brute force, silent, deadly, and relentless. Alongside him came Ajax the Lesser, swifter, smaller, but no less dangerous. And then There was Odysseus, the trickster king of Ithaca. Though his mind rivaled the gods in sharpness, he had no desire to join the war. When Agamemnon's envoys came to Ithaca, they found Odysseus plowing a field with an ox and a horse, sowing salt into the soil and muttering nonsense. But no trick was beyond being unmasked. The envoys placed his infant son Telemachus in front of the plow. Odysseus hesitated for a single breath, and that was enough. He was no longer mad. He was a king bound by honor. Reluctantly he took up his sword. The Achaean fleet, 1,000 ships strong, cut through the Aegean Sea like blades across water. Black sails billowed with purpose, each bearing warriors whose names would soon be etched into the bones of history. It was the largest force ever assembled by the Greeks, not for conquest, but for retribution. For honor, for Helen. As the coastline of Ilium crept into view, the walls of Troy rose in defiance against the sky, vast, golden, and divine. They were said to be impenetrable, built by the hands of Apollo and Poseidon during a forgotten age when gods still walked among mortals. From atop those battlements, watchmen saw the ocean darken with sails. They knew the war had come. The Greeks landed on the Trojan shores like a storm. The beachhead became a fortress overnight, tents and ships forming a sprawling camp that would soon become both sanctuary and prison. For this was no swift battle, no glorious charge and return. This would be a siege, long, brutal, and unrelenting. The first assault came swiftly. The Greeks, confident in their numbers, struck hard against the city gates. But Troy did not bend. Behind its walls stood Hector, Aeneas, and the sons of Priam, warriors honed in discipline and bound by duty. They repelled the invaders, forcing the Greeks back to the beaches. What was meant to be a campaign of weeks became a war of years. 9 years would pass. The war became cyclical, grinding, less about Helen and more about survival, vengeance, and the pride of kings. With the gates of Troy locked tight, the Greeks turned their fury outward. They raided the surrounding regions, burning towns, enslaving populations, and seizing wealth. It was during these campaigns that many fateful events unfolded. Among them, the capture of 2 women who would unknowingly alter the course of the war. Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, was taken by Agamemnon as a war prize. And Briseis, a woman of noble blood, was given to Achilles as his reward for victory in battle. In their enslavement, a new chain of conflict was forged, not between Greeks and Trojans, but among the Greeks themselves. Though Troy stood firm, it was the Greek camp that would begin to fracture. The enemy outside the walls remained strong, but the enemy within the ranks was beginning to awaken. As the siege dragged into its 10th year, with blood soaking the soil and smoke rising from pillaged towns, both sides began to feel the weight of war, not just on their swords, but on their souls. The Greek camp had grown weary. Supplies dwindled. Disease crept through the ranks. The Trojans, though shielded by their mighty walls, lived in constant fear of betrayal, fire, or famine. Each day brought death, each night, mourning, and still Helen remained the ghost at the center of it all. It was in this climate of exhaustion that the idea was raised, a final attempt to end the bloodshed not with armies, but with a duel. Menelaus, wronged husband and king of Sparta, demanded justice. Paris, prince of Troy and the man who had taken Helen, agreed. Whether out of arrogance or guilt or simply divine manipulation, he stepped forward to meet his fate. The terms were clear. Single combat between the 2 men. The victor would take Helen. The loser would forfeit both her and his honor. And the war, in theory, would end. Both armies gathered in silence to witness the confrontation. Thousands of warriors, gods in disguise, and Helen herself watched as 2 lives, and the fate of 2 civilizations, balanced on the edge of a blade. At first, Paris appeared as radiant as the day he arrived in Sparta. Dressed in polished armor, his golden hair gleaming in the sunlight, he looked every inch the son of a king. But beneath the splendor was hesitation. He was no match for Menelaus in skill or strength, and he knew it. As the duel began, Menelaus attacked with ferocity. His strikes were relentless, his fury personal. Paris faltered quickly, knocked to the ground, helpless beneath the Spartan king's sword. The duel and the war should have ended then and there, but fate once again intervened. Aphrodite, protector of Paris and architect of his lust, descended from Olympus. In a gust of wind and flash of divine power, she seized Paris and spirited him away, back to his bedchamber within Troy's high walls. The duel had been a farce, peace, a fleeting illusion. Menelaus stood alone in the dust, sword dripping with sweat but no blood. Around him warriors murmured, confused, angry, betrayed. Helen, watching from the battlements, turned away. The man she had once fled with now lay trembling in silken sheets, shield discarded, pride broken. Her love for Paris, whatever it had once been, began to dissolve in that moment. What remained now was war. With Greek forces pushed back, Achilles' companion Patroclus donned his armor and entered the battle in his place. He fought bravely, but Hector struck him down, mistaking him for Achilles. When Achilles learned of Patroclus's death, his grief was immeasurable. Enraged, he returned to battle. Dressed in armor forged by the god Hephaestus, Achilles hunted Hector, chased him around Troy's walls, and finally struck him down. Ignoring Hector's pleas for mercy, Achilles tied the corpse to his chariot and dragged it through the dust. Only the grief of old King Priam, who knelt and begged for his son's body, could soften Achilles' heart. The warrior returned Hector to his people, granting him a hero's funeral. With Hector gone, the morale of Troy crumbled. But still, the city stood. Achilles continued his assault, cutting down Trojan after Trojan, storming their defenses with godlike fury. It seemed no one could stop him. No warrior, no wall, no army. But the gods still had their own plans. Paris, aided by Apollo, was guided to the one weakness Achilles possessed, the heel his mother had held when she dipped him into the river Styx. From behind the safety of the wall, Paris loosed an arrow. Apollo directed the shot. The arrow struck true. Achilles staggered, then fell. His invincible body turned pale. Poison surged through his veins, and in a matter of moments the greatest warrior of Greece lay dead in the dust. His armor was stripped, his body mourned, and Paris, though victorious for a moment, would not live long to boast. Soon after, he too would fall, killed by an arrow in the war he had begun. With both Achilles and Hector gone, the war reached a standstill. Troy's walls remained strong, and no amount of bloodshed could bring them down. Until Odysseus devised a final, desperate plan. He ordered the Greeks to construct a massive wooden horse, a tribute to Athena. But it was no gift, it was a trap. Hollow on the inside, it would carry a small group of elite warriors hidden within its belly. The rest of the Greek army pretended to sail away, leaving the horse on the beach. When the Trojans awoke, they saw the camp deserted, ships gone, silence. The war was over, or so they believed. They brought the horse inside the city as a trophy, ignoring the cries of Cassandra, who screamed that it was a trick. Her curse ensured no one believed her. And that night, while Troy celebrated, the Greek warriors emerged from within the horse. They opened the gates to the returning fleet, which had hidden just beyond the horizon. The city was asleep. But not for long. Greek soldiers flooded the streets, homes were burned, temples looted, children slain. Troy, once mighty, became a city of fire and ash. King Priam, too old to fight, was slaughtered at the altar of Zeus by Pyrrhus, the son of Achilles. His blood soaked the stones of his palace. And then came Andromache, Hector's widow. Her young son Astyanax was torn from her arms and thrown from the city walls, so no heir to Troy would live to reclaim it. Andromache was taken as a slave. Elsewhere, Cassandra, having sought refuge in the temple of Athena, was found by Ajax the Lesser. There, in the most sacred of places, he violated her in front of the goddess's statue. It was an unspeakable act, and one the gods would not forgive. As Ajax attempted to flee the city, Athena struck his ship with lightning. The sea opened up beneath him. Poseidon dragged him to the depths. His screams were swallowed by the waves. But Cassandra's suffering was not over. When the war was done, the Greeks returned home, not in glory, but in bitterness and blood. Agamemnon claimed Cassandra as his prize. He brought her back to Mycenae, where he had left behind his wife, Clytemnestra. But Clytemnestra had not forgotten the daughter he had sacrificed, nor did she forgive his new concubine. As Agamemnon lay in his bath, she took an axe and murdered him in cold blood. She then turned on Cassandra. The cursed prophet, who had foreseen every horror yet was believed by no one, was silenced forever. Of the Trojans, only a few escaped the slaughter. Chief among them, Aeneas, cousin to Hector, son of the goddess Aphrodite. Carrying his elderly father on his back and leading his son by the hand, Aeneas fled through the burning city. Guided by visions and omens, he journeyed west, across the sea, eventually landing on the shores of Italy. There, his descendants would found a new city, a new civilization. Realm. As for Helen, her fate remains debated. Some say she was taken back to Sparta by Menelaus, forgiven and restored as queen. Others claim she was never in Troy at all, and that a phantom image had taken her place, while the real Helen remained hidden in Egypt. But in Homer's tale, Helen and Menelaus returned to Sparta. They ruled in peace until their deaths, when they passed into the afterlife, to live together forever on the Isle of the Blessed. With Troy in ruins, and the victors returning to fractured homes, only one hero's journey had just begun. Odysseus, the most cunning of the Greeks, set sail for Ithaca, a voyage that would take 10 long years. He would face gods and monsters, witches and storms. He would battle Cyclopes, sirens, and the wrath of Poseidon. And all the while, his wife Penelope and son Telemachus would wait, never knowing if their king would ever return. That was the Odyssey. Through these stories, the wrath of Achilles, the fall of Hector, the burning of Troy, the return of Odysseus, Homer carved the identity of Western civilization into stone. His words, spoken aloud by memory, became sacred texts, passed down not on paper, but in spirit. He captured the full range of human experience: honor, jealousy, pride, betrayal, love, vengeance, and redemption. Even now, nearly 3,000 years later, every epic tale, every hero's journey, every tragic fall, can trace its roots back to this one poet, a blind man, a voice of the gods, a legend for all time. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell. Explore more of our deep dives into mythology, ancient history, and legendary literature. Links are in the description. From the ruins of Troy to the gates of Olympus, the journey never ends.